Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast. My name is James Azar, and I'm going to be your host. So, what is the CyberHub Engage podcast? Well, it's a podcast for those concerned about cybersecurity, information security in any vertical. I invite guests to give you actionable takeaway items that you can use in your everyday lives that don't change your routine. And this is our first podcast ever, so I'm going to have a guest with me today here. His name is Mr. Ralph Pasquariello from the Snellings and Walters Insurance Agency, and he's going to be talking about cyber liability, and you're going to get a hold of that here just momentarily. But before that, I want to thank you for listening to our podcast today. This is our first ever podcast, and it's my first time doing it, so I'll probably make mistakes along the way. You'll have to grow with me as I grow with you as my audience. I think that's pretty normal to do. And so this is CyberHub Engage. You can follow us on Twitter, connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook at the CyberHub Engage group. You'll be able to interact with our experts on the group. You'll be able to ask questions. You can hashtag us, CyberHub Engage. You can also look me up on Twitter, James_Azar1, and follow me there. Ask questions. Tell me what issues bother you in terms of cybersecurity. This is not about me, but about you, the listener, and what you want to hear, what you want to listen, what you want to know, and maybe are afraid to do so. You can do so anonymously. I promise I will not reveal your name. Or you can do so publicly, and we can have you on the show and we can discuss it. If you're an expert and you want to join us, we'd love to have you. Just join our CyberHub Engage group, send me a message or tweet at me, and we'll get you there. Again, my Twitter is James_Azar1. The group is CyberHub Engage, CyberHub, one word. All right, y'all, we're going to be right back after this with Mr. Ralph Pasquariello, and we're going to talk about cyber liability. Thank you. And we're back here at the CyberHub Engage podcast, and joining me right now is Mr. Ralph Pasquariello. Welcome.
Thanks, James.
All right, and Ralph's here, and we're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity and everything. That the purpose of this podcast is really to educate you and bring experts to help you understand why cybersecurity is important, but beyond that, to really give you some pointers and some key takeaways, and that's our goal. And so I'm going to pass this off to Ralph and have Ralph introduce himself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about his background and, why he's an expert in cyber today.
Great. Thanks, James. Yeah, and it's cyber liability, not cyber security. I just play a cybersecurity guy on the weekends. But yes, I appreciate being here. For me, the road to cyber liability started around 9 years ago. I got into property and casualty here in Atlanta from a manufacturing industry position for 24 years. And I just found that insurance was kind of boring until I found cyber liability insurance. And that put me on a track, and like I said, about 9 years ago, and just kind of dug into it real deep. And what I found fascinating with this portion of the property and casualty insurance, professional insurance, was that it was not static. It's completely, constantly changing. It's in flux, as we call in manufacturing, right? And morphing all the time. So as the threats change, the policies change, the coverages change, and the risks in standard property and casualty just really never change. Fires, tornadoes, things like that for buildings. But the cyber fascinated me. We started off with data breach, and now we've just gone full circle. So it keeps me moving. It keeps me cutting edge with a lot of you tech guys and you cyber guys, which I enjoy being around. And that's the story. So
awesome. And so you're based out of Atlanta.
Yes.
So you're my next door neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously while we're recording this, the city of Atlanta was breached last week. And funny enough, but I think one of the ways I found out was your post on LinkedIn on Thursday morning when you said the city of Atlanta is dealing with a hack. And that's when we started investigating it. So thank you for being the breaking news source
You're welcome.
for the community.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I always get asked is, what do I need to know before buying cyber liability? And what are some of the things that I should be asking an agent? Because, I know you, obviously, and you're very well versed with it, but our listeners, the person they may be talking to is not Ralph. It's someone who may not understand the cyber liabilities that are entailed. And an average breach today costs around $7 million. And I think, what is it? Most insurance policies are $1 million.
$1 million, yeah, right. Actually, it's gone down a little bit. It was up around 7.5 a few years ago. It's dropped a lot now recently because the actual risks and the claims have dropped, but there's many more of them, and I'll explain that why. In order to buy and I tell everyone, don't buy a policy off the shelf, and not one size fits all. It's not like that. Unless you're a small shop, you're a Dunkin' Donuts on the corner and you want some sort of insurance for your credit cards, PCI compliance or something like that, then you can buy a already made policy. But if you're a company that's doing 20 million to 500 million, $1 billion in revenue, don't buy an off-the-shelf policy. Have a true assessment of what's at risk. So I always tell people, look, if your building is worth $20 million, why are you insuring it for $5 million? And I see that over and over and over. The CFOs that I go in and I speak with, they stop me at the door and they say, hey, we're compliant. We're good. I said, well, you know what? Open up the books. Let me look. Let me see what you have.
I hate to interrupt you, but is that compliant? Like, we're, if it's a healthcare company, we're HIPAA regulated,
SOC 2, SOC 3, right?
Or PCI or whatnot.
Because that's a defense. Because the CFO, that's what he knows.
Right.
But if I'm dealing with a CISO or a CTO, it's a different conversation totally. So that's why I like to have them all in the same room, so that no one points fingers. So when I speak to the technology officer, we can talk tech and security, and then we go over to the CFO, and we can relate that in risk and reward to him. So you're going to build a 5-foot firewall, or you're going to build a 20-foot firewall. What does it cost? It doesn't matter, because if someone digs under it and gets through, what's your spend going to be then, right? So what's the claim going to look like? That's what I want to know. What's the worst thing that can happen, and what's it going to look like? So we need to find that out before you buy anything.
And so what you're telling our business owners is really get an assessment done.
Yes, absolutely.
Look at your entire business and kind of see what really needs to be protected.
Right.
So for right now, we're going to use the city of Atlanta because it's the happening now.
Mm-hmm.
But the city of Atlanta right now has a lot of different partners. Obviously, they're a big city. They're a major city in the country. And we're residents here, so we're all kind of feeling it. Apparently, people at Hartfield-Jackson don't have free Wi-Fi still.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not a fun travel experience. But when you assess a company and you look at what kind of cyber liability to consider, it's not just measuring, you would say, your data, right? It's just looking at your entire operation.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. So let's backtrack a few years back. 8-9 years ago, we talked about data breaches. We weren't speaking a lot about cyber or criminal warfare and cyber warfare. We were talking about data breaches because that was what was current. So the attacks years ago were primarily on big data companies. So thieves would steal the data, they'd move on, they'd sell it in the dark web, deep web, and on you go. So recently, though, within the last 18 months, a lot of that has shifted over because of the high demand in the malware for ransom attacks.
Right.
So ransom attacks right now were up, I believe last year, close to $1 billion was paid out in ransom. 3-4 years ago, it was $25 million a year. It jumped to $250 million, and it's just escalated since. Little pieces. So people are getting, instead of the big ransom attacks, they're getting 5,000 a hit, 10,000 a hit, and people are paying it. So when, like you said earlier, if I'm not a big data company, what's at risk? Why would I buy cyber insurance? So A is, of course, the cost of malware, cost of ransom attacks, cleanup, forensics, attorneys, and so forth. But the big thing nowadays is for manufacturers that have the business interruption. So in other words, a company which I won't mention, but I just insured last week. So they do $300 million a year in manufacturing. If their computers get bricked and they get knocked out for a month and they can't turn a wheel in that factory for 1 month, what is it going to cost them? Most CFOs prior to this would say, well, my insurance will pay for that. Your general liability will not pay for that because the root or the trigger was a cyber attack. So unless you have a good policy, business interruption, cyber interruption would cover that. So that's a big, people don't know. They say, yeah, well, what's at risk? We're not a data company. Well, I pull the plugs out on all your computers and see how long you last, see how long you stay in business, right?
Right.
So
when people pay, and obviously, I'm not one of those that endorses paying for ransomware. I think, if you look at it, it's if you have a list on the dark web, you have the list of people who were, successfully hacked and paid, and the list who weren't, and those who weren't typically go on the least likely list to get hit again.
Right.
And those who were are on that list of, hey, they paid once, they'll probably pay twice, 3 times, 4 times over.
Mm-hmm.
How many of those people, in your experience, have you seen actually recover data after paying for it?
I believe it's a 42%. That was the last stat that I had seen from Secret Service, was 42% that actually got their information back. Whether they dragged their feet, didn't pay the ransom in time, which happens a lot, because they think we're going to fight this, we're going to fight it. And then when the clock stops, they lose their information. So the stats are kind of crazy out there, what we see, because not everyone reveals. That's the big thing. I'm on the Atlanta task force, the Electronic Crimes Task Force in Atlanta, which is Secret Service, FBI, Homeland Security. And part of the problem is that people will not reveal. They don't come forward and say, hey, this happened to us. They want to pay it. They want to sweep it under the rug and move forward because it's not good for business, right?
Right.
So we see a lot of that. It's, it depends on the industry. If you're not regulated, like HIPAA, if it's a data breach, naturally over 500 records, you need to divulge that you had a data breach legally. But in the rest of the world, people aren't going to come right out and say, hey, guess what happened to us last week,
We got breached.
Unless you're Atlanta, city of Atlanta.
Well, I guess we couldn't sweep that one under the rug. I'm sorry, why are you writing me a ticket on a piece of paper?
Right.
Well, we can't issue you a ticket.
Yeah.
We can't log into our systems.
Right.
I mean, it's a massive disruption for business.
Right. And do you pay it? I think that was your question too.
Right.
Do I pay the ransom?
Do you pay the ransom?
So I guess it comes down to risk reward. If I'm a hospital, right, like the big hospitals out in California, they get breached all the time. They get locked up. So a ransom attack on a hospital, I believe when they are down, the stats were like $5,000 to $7,000 a minute that they're losing. So it's plus you look at human life, right?
Right.
If I'm a hospital and my systems are shut down, I may be losing patients because of that. So again, a $25,000 to $50,000 ransom. If I'm the hospital administrator, we're paying it right now
To get our data back as soon as possible.
to get up and running, because there's a huge risk there. Am I willing to risk human life or financially 3 or 4 days by the time we're up and running again? It's cheaper to pay the ransom. It really is. And that's what we're up against.
And does insurance liability reimburse you when you pay a ransom?
Yes. If you have, good question, if you have the right policy. So we deal with about 150 insurance companies on a regular basis, our brokerage. Out of that, there's probably 30 that come to me wanting me to sell their cyber insurance. Out of that 30, I'll deal with about 6 or 7 because they have the right fit. Like we said before, not one shoe fits all, not one size fits all. So you need to be careful in what you buy. The exclusions. How many people take an insurance policy, grab their book and go to page 397 and read all the exclusions? No one does. So that's where I come in to assess it. That's what I look for. Not what are you covered for? No. What's excluded? Subcontractors? Maybe. How many tech companies out there have subcontractors? Dozens of them, hundreds of them.
Well, most companies today have subcontractors.
Correct.
I mean, that's how you go to business. And if you're own a subcontracting business, one of the things that I think when you did the cyber symposium here in Alpharetta with the Tech 400 group,
right?
That's a great group around here in the Alpharetta area. You had mentioned that most contractors, a lot of times by contract, end up having have to own cyber liability in case their breach impacts that business.
Correct. So that's third party. Right. But if I'm a company and I have subcontractors out there doing work for me, and my policies, either my errors and omissions policy, or if I'm a tech company, we can tie that errors and omissions policy into a cyber and we do a wrap. So it's all encompassing. E&O and cyber all encompassing. But you need to draw out that exclusion for subcontractors and make sure that they're included, because they work for you. They do work for you. If they pop the wrong switch and they cause the breach, it's going to be in your lap.
Like the Home Depot.
Exactly. Well, that was a third party. Home Depot. Home Depot, yes.
Was a third party, and
Target was
right. Third party.
Right. So Target was breached from a company up in Philadelphia, and I can use their name because they're out of business now. But it was a Fazio. It was a heating and air company, so they went backdoor through them, and of course they had access on that route. We all know what happened, and
that they're out of business now.
They're out of business. So that's the third party. So I need to make sure that if I'm not a big data company or I'm not a big manufacturer, but I have access upstream, downstream, suppliers and customers and clients, and I'm connected to them, and my people are sending emails back and forth, and if malware comes from my company, infects your company, and puts you out of business, when the forensics are all done, guess who they're going to come after? Yeah. They're going to come after my company. Their insurance company will subrogate and try and get as much out of me as possible. And if it means putting me out of business, that's what happens.
That's the price.
That's the price.
That's the new world we live in.
That's the price for saying, Ralph, I'm compliant, but I don't have any insurance. So I don't care if you're compliant. You take the list of everyone that's been breached lately, everyone. They're probably all compliant, and they do their best. And that's the problem. They have cybersecurity. They're doing the best they can. But the bottom line is we can't stop it. We cannot stop it. And that's
it's not a lost battle. It's just a very difficult battle to stay ahead.
It's a slow leak. It's like, honey, you have a screw in your tire. She says, is it flat? And I said, no, but it's going to be.
It takes one human error.
Right, exactly.
I mean, if you're a Boston Red Sox fan,
Hey.
You went through years of misery until you finally won it. But there's all these different stories of that one
error. It's all that Bill Bruckner, with the one hop.
That one hop, we almost did it.
That's right.
And so, in cyber, it's that one hop, right? It's that one employee. I read a report that Verizon did where they did a phishing email training to their staff, right? And after that, they did a test to see how many people actually, understood what to do.
Right.
And 23% of them opened the email. 11% actually clicked on the link.
That's right.
And went through it. So, I mean, if you're a company the size of Verizon that has, 50, 60,000 employees, I mean, you just got breached by...
The phishing schemes, the phishing emails that come out, they better and better and better. I mean, they look so good. And the email addresses, as you know, are no longer just pasted and underneath. You can't hover over them. They're duped. They're copied. So people are cloning email addresses. I mean, it looks good. It looks authentic. And...
So a question we always get asked at Cyber Hub Engage, and this is always kind of in our groups that we see, that is, hackers is probably some kid in his mom's basement, bored and hacking us. And your experience, in our conversations have always led me to believe that that's really not the case anymore. I mean, that was the case 10, 15 years ago. Today it's a business.
It is
Hacking
a business.
is a business.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when numbers like $1 billion in ransom are going to be paid out this year. It's big business. Guys go in, they drive into an office building, and the office building may have 300 or 500 people in them, and they're all sitting there, they're all hacking. I mean, if it's either a government type effort, like we had some in China that we know of, and there are some in Russia that we know of. But
well, and right now, I think it was the state of South Carolina that prosecuted 9 Iranians for
Right.
indicted. I'm sorry, not prosecuted.
Right.
Indicted 9
And
Iranians.
it's hard to bring these guys out. You can't extradite them. A lot of them, we know who they are. According to our resources, you and I, we
Right.
know some of the local Secret Service guys and FBI, and they know who they are, but they can't bring them here.
Well,
So
the good news was yesterday, and I spoke about this earlier in the podcast. The Spanish authorities arrested 9 Ukrainians and Russian nationals who were on vacation in Spain through an Interpol warrant for hacking, and they're probably going to get extradited to the States. And these guys, I think it was $1.2 billion worth of hacking over the last 7 years
wow,
that they've done.
yeah,
So
that's usually when they get them, when they're on vacation.
Right. Well, a hacker eventually has to come out of,
Spend some of that money.
right. I mean, you're going to want to leave Russia. I mean,
Right.
no one ever have I heard said, "Oh, I'm going to Moscow and I will stay." For
Right.
the leave, that's
Right.
just not the
Actually,
case.
the FBI got a few of the largest guys ever in Miami a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So they bought some condos down in South Beach, and a couple Ferraris sitting out front and Lamborghinis, and so we knew who they were, and they went in and got them. So
Hackers are professionals, right? And they'll target any business. One of the other things you mentioned in the cyber symposium was they don't really go after you for the sake of going after you. They're going to use you to get to someone else sometimes. Sometimes you're breached and you don't even know it until the third level party that you're associated with is actually breached as well.
right, and that's a good point too. I didn't mention that, James. That the discovery period now between the moment you are actually hacked and then you figure it out, by the time you find out, that average is now 206 days. So when people say, well, how do I know when I've been breached? How do I know when I have a malware attack or a SQL injection and it's been in my system for... The answer is sometimes you don't know, right? It's a knock on the door from the FBI that says, hey, you've been breached. And 206 days is a long time. So if someone's been in your computer for 6 months, fishing around, taking what they want, exfiltrating information at will when you're not there, chances are that there's not a lot in your computer that they haven't seen. And that's why they're so well adapted at writing these emails and comprising emails that seem real. And they're very, very effective. The choreography that goes into these attacks it's professional,
And an attack isn't just something that you wake up in the morning and go, all right, I'm going to go after, Fazio's in Philadelphia, right? It's really targeted. It's recon work. It's
a lot of recon, yeah. But a lot of it starts with, I call, being pollinated. It's like leaving your window open in Atlanta in the spring. Pollen is everywhere. So people say, well, why would they want to attack my company? Well, you know what? We don't do that. They may shotgun half a million emails on one afternoon. And if you're going to click on it or give it a smell, then you're a target.
Right.
So, I mean, it's a process. A lot of these are process. They take their time. They may take a year or 2 years to get what they want. But the bottom line is, like some of the guys have told me in cybersecurity, if they want you bad enough, they're going to get in.
Right.
It's just a matter of time.
Right. I mean, it's, the initial rumor of the Atlanta breach was that someone was on a free Wi-Fi somewhere and accessed a city app. That's kind of the initial intelligence report. I don't know how accurate that is, and so I won't use that as a stepping stone, but I will have that lead us to a question, which is, as an organization, there's specific things that you can do. Correct?
Absolutely.
What do you look for when you go into a company and you're looking to assess them? what are some of the things that companies can do in order to save money on cyber liability insurance altogether?
Yeah, of course, there are certain parameters we look at. We look at the size of the company, how many employees, how many locations, what type of revenue do you do. So obviously, if you're a $3 million company or a $500 million company, there's greater risks. There's more endpoints. So what we look at, first of all, we do a thorough application, and it's not a 2-page. It's usually 14 pages. We want to know a lot of information before we're going to insure you for $20 or $30 million at a risk. And then a lot of times, a company that is with it and they know what's going on, they will have a security audit that they can provide to us. It may be SOC 2, SOC 3, some compliance audits, things like that. But over and above and beyond, they've been doing penetration testing on their own. They have some white hat people working with them, so they get it. Those guys that want a $50 million limit, they're going to be prepared to give me the type of information that we need to secure a good policy for them at a good price. If they don't have any, let's call them firewalls, right? If they don't have any firewalls in place, either we're not going to insure them, or B, if they want to get insurance, they're going to pay through the roof, and it's going to be ugly. So, but an assessment is easy. But I just tell people, look, figure it out. What do you have on board? What do you have to lose? And then from there we go ahead and we do an assessment and we sell them policies. So. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, it totally does. I mean, it's one of those where, so in your opinion, some of the best, and I really want to kind of take it to actionable items for our listeners. So I'm going to summarize and you tell me if I'm wrong.
Sorry. Yeah, I drifted on it. So education.
Education,
right? Absolutely, 100%.
And
because that's your biggest link. That's your weakest link.
What's a common best practice that you see in good organizations that actually pay attention to cyber?
Good organizations will, like ours. Let's take my company, for instance. 65 people in the office, and we test them all the time. We have a couple of programs that we use to educate the people on cyber liability, on cyber risks. We make them go in every month, and they take a 3-minute video and a test and things like that. So being cognizant of what's out there, I think, is really, really important. I spoke at a seminar recently, and there were a bunch of attorneys, and half the room of the attorneys didn't know what a ransom attack was. I'm like, how can you, in today's, this was only a few months ago, how can you not know that? So education, absolutely education.
Overpriced lawyers again.
Overpriced lawyers. But, bringing your own devices in, having free will to access, to plug in any thumb drives you want and things like that, those practices need to go away. You need to tighten up the ship. No thumb drives allowed. Disable the ports. Things like that. That if you're really, really, truly concerned about where this could potentially put you out of business, do what's right. Get a cyber security professional to give you a checklist of what to do, where to start. Get the 10 best points on how to avoid a data breach or a cyber breach, and practice that, and be prepared.
And we'll actually post something like that on the CyberHub Engage pages on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, so that our listeners can actually get that, because we do have something really similar to that. So
Good.
We'll get that out there. Perfect. This has been a lot of fun, and I know we can keep going, but I want to be cognizant of our time. And so I have one last question for you, which is really, no matter what type of company I am, I need cyber liability. Is that a true or false statement?
True. Absolutely.
And compromised information, at the end of the day, once forensics and investigation is done, is if you're a company who's been breached as a third-party vendor to, we said Fazias, and we'll keep using them in the target breach, but they're out of business obviously because the insurance companies went after them for
Correct.
the results of the breach, and that was a significant breach at its time. I mean, people forget that Target's point of sales were breached because of this.
Right.
and there's been many of breaches thereafter.
Mm-hmm.
Of all the breaches that have been out there, which one has fascinated you the most?
There's several. I mean, fascination and quirkiness. I mean, Sony was crazy. The Sony breach was, we still don't, I mean, people know kind of where that came from. But you look at Sony, I believe they had a $60 million policy for a limit. And they blew through that in the first hour. I mean, you know, so they had insurance, but obviously it wasn't enough. A company that big should have gone right to the limit, you know, gone to the 300 million. Target was amazing. But Equifax was, I cringe when I think that it took 60 days to find out that they had been breached. They've been breached for 60 days. And then there was a lot of shenanigans that went on before they told the public, you know, and that's public record. And I'm not going to throw them under the bus. The poor guys, they did the best they could, but it happens, you know.
Well, those that were responsible for the breach are no longer there.
That's correct.
And so we hope that...
Don't forget the patch. Patch.
When you get a little thing on your computer that says, hey, this is a patch, and especially if you use Windows, please just...
Patch it.
Go make yourself a cup of coffee.
Make sure it's not a phishing email first, though, before you click on it. So,
awesome.
Thanks, James.
This has been great, Ralph. Thanks for joining us today for our episode. There's more coming up after this. We're going to go to a slight commercial break here. This is the Cyber Hub Engage podcast. Hey everyone, and we're back. I want to thank Ralph for joining me in the studio today. This has been our first ever inaugural episode of Cyber Hub Engage. And we're so excited. This has been about a year in the making. We've talked about it, but we're finally executing. And so we're very excited about that. Next week's episode, we're going to talk about cyberbullying and things that you can do if you have children, if you have kids. Ms. Corinne Salzberg of Cyber Hub Summit will be joining me to talk about that. Full disclosure, I am hosting Cyber Hub Summit on May 3rd in Austin, Texas. But Corinne is an old friend of mine, someone who I've known for a very long time and a business partner. With that being said, you're going to love her. I promise you that much. So make sure to listen to the next episode. This is Cyber Hub Engage. Please like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, join our LinkedIn group. We look forward to giving you a great podcast next time. Cyberbullying is something you want to pay attention to. My name is James Azar. This is the Cyber Hub Engage podcast. Thanks for listening.